Well, folks, I don't know what else to tell you other than sometimes it just pays to be a little lazy. Because, see, if I would have recorded this episode on time, I would have missed all the fun. What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled in spirit today by Nerd Teas because, unfortunately, my kettle stopped working this afternoon, so I was not able to make myself a cup of that delicious goodness that is Nerd Teas. But welcome to the East and West Final prediction episode of my 2021 CFL Football Pick Show. And boy, we got a humdinger of an episode here for you. Obviously, the East and West Finals are just 48 hours away, both of those games being played on Sunday. And literally just about an hour ago, as I was coming home from work, a huge situation broke with the Toronto Argonauts and their quarterback, McLeod Bethel-Thompson, which we will, of course, talk about. This is a developing story, but I just got an update just a few minutes ago that I can share with you on this episode. We'll try to make sense of it all. First of all, the semifinal round, the last episode that you saw where we talked about the East and West semifinals, was the pure definition of a roller coaster for me. I swept the East Division semifinal. Hamilton winning, Hamilton covering, and under on the points. So I started 3-0, off to a great start. The West final came around. I got swept. It happens sometimes. Got swept on the West final, so obviously 1-1, both straight up against the spread and on the totals in the semifinal round. 3-3, 50%. Sometimes you sweep, sometimes you get swept. It happens, and we move on. CFL Fantasy. Obviously, that game does continue through the playoffs. The game basically restarts itself at the beginning of the playoffs because you can only pick 5 roster spots instead of the normal 7. I did kind of struggle in CFL Fantasy in the semifinal round. In the official Atlantic Schooners CFL Fantasy Football League, after the semifinal week, I'm in 22nd place out of 85, so we did pick up a couple of more people playing the fantasy game for the playoffs specifically. Only brought in 48.7 points in the semifinal round, so wasn't exactly the greatest week, and we're looking to rebound off of that. And if you saw my tweet from a day or two ago, I'm taking a bit of a unique angle on CFL Fantasy this week, and we will see if it works out. Now, the 48.7 points that I got last week, only good enough for 2,695th overall. In terms of the players that were on my roster, my MVP from the semifinal round is Don Jackson, running back for the Hamilton Ticats, put up 46 yards rushing on 13 carries, did have a rush touchdown, which obviously contributed big to his point total, adding 2 catches for 15 yards, was good for 14.1 fantasy points. Not a terrible performance by any means, but he was the best performance that I had anywhere across my fantasy team. He was my MVP, so it was a bit of a struggle last week. But we're going to turn it around this week, once again, taking an interesting angle. My roster is going to be at the end of this episode, so you're going to want to make sure you stick around. Don't skip ahead. Listen to what I have to say about the games. But my fantasy roster will be at the end of the episode. Your East and West finals shape up like this. The Hamilton Ticats, who were at home last week, now hit the road, going to Toronto to take on the Toronto Argos in the East final. The West final, as we mentioned, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, who were at home last week, now have to hit the road, now have to go up to Winnipeg, take on a Blue Bombers team who might be getting Andrew Harris back, and that might be a really big deal. So that is going to be your West final. 2 really good division finals here. Not exact division finals that I picked, but they're going to be 2 good games. Obviously, you had the added wrinkle this week of the Argos and the Blue Bombers not having played last week, both of those teams coming in off of byes. So I went back and took a look at how teams managed in their games coming directly off of their bye. Teams coming off of their bye week this year in the CFL were only 12-9 straight up, so they were over 500, but it wasn't exactly overwhelmingly over 500. In those games, they scored 492 points. They gave up 458 points. That is only an average score of 23-22. So yes, the numbers slightly lean in favor of those teams, but it is far from overwhelming. So let's start with the fun stuff. Of course, the East Division final, the Hamilton Ticats on the road in Toronto taking on the Argos. Ticats moving to 9-6 on the season with their win last week at home against Montreal. Hamilton now winners of 2 straight games. Toronto 9-5 on the season. They lost their last regular season game. It was a game that wound up being meaningless to them. They had already wrapped up the East Division. Argos and the Ticats played each other 4 times in the regular season. Hamilton got the best of Toronto in their first meeting. That was back in week 5 by a score of 32-19. Toronto then went to win 3 straight games head-to-head against Hamilton. Week 6, so they played a home and home back-to-back weeks. Week 6, Toronto won by a single point. Week 10, Toronto won by a single point, that game being in Hamilton. And then in week 15, a bit of a blowout here. Argos 31, Ticats 12. Not a close game at all. Both teams putting up an equal record of 3-1 in their last 4 games, respectively. Hamilton outscoring opponents by 5 points on average, 21-16. Toronto outscoring opponents by 4 points, 23-19. Both teams had success against East Division opponents this year, but kind of in different contexts. The Ticats were only 5-4 against the East. Of course, they dropped 3 games to the Argos this season. But in those games, they outscored opponents by an average of a full touchdown, 23-16. So they might have only been 1 game over 500, but their results tended to be quite strong. The Argos 6-2 against the East Division this year, but on average only outscoring opponents by a single point, 24-23, which means the wins were relatively close, the losses were pretty spectacular. Hamilton treaded water this season by and large away from their own building. They were under 500 at 3-4, were outscored by a single point in those games on average, 20-19, where the Argos were, in a word, dominant at home this year. 6-1 on their home field, outscoring opponents by a full touchdown, 26-19. So home field advantage, we talk about it all the time. This week it is very, very significant. We talked last week about opportunism for the Hamilton Ticats and how that was probably their biggest edge going into that game with the Alouettes. Hamilton's biggest edge this week is opportunism part 2. Basically, what I said was going to happen with Hamilton's defense is exactly what happened against the Alouettes. Hamilton's defense generating 5 turnovers in that game, and they scored 13 points directly off of those 5 turnovers. Hamilton was great at this all season long. And now they're playing an Argos team who was one of the worst teams in the CFL in terms of their ball control. I believe they were -14, in fact, in the turnover differential this season, where we talked about Montreal was even money because they were 28-28. The Argos -14 and allowed 77 points this season directly off of turnovers. This, I believe, is the path for the Hamilton Ticats to win this football game. They have to play opportunistic defense like they did last week. If they can have a repeat of that, they are putting themselves in excellent position. As far as I'm concerned, the biggest edge that the Toronto Argos have coming into this football game is their diverse aerial attack. And when I say that, I mean, look, you look at this Argos offense, we talked about it a few times this season, it's tough to really identify a specific, like, that's their number 1 receiver. You have names on this team who, like, you got names like Ricky Collins, you got Josh Huff, who they just brought over now. You've got like name receivers on the team. But then you have guys like Chandler Worthy and Curly Gittens Jr., who is arguably the Argos' top receiving threat for the back half of the season. You also have DJ Foster, who put up significant pass reception numbers this year. The Argos sit with 4 receivers in the top 20 overall in the CFL this year in terms of receiving yards, and 3 in the top 15 for most catches. That is a diverse aerial attack, and if you can play offense, keeping that defense guessing as to where you're actually going to send the football, you're going to put yourself in a great position to win most weeks. We talked about teams coming off the bye. How did the Argos do coming off the bye this year? They were only 1-2 coming off of their 3 bye weeks. They were outscored in those games in total 85-70. So they were high-scoring games, obviously, and they didn't exactly have the greatest record there. It was the week 5 loss to Hamilton that we talked about. That game was in Hamilton. That was a 32-19 loss. They did beat Ottawa 35-16. That game was in Toronto. But then week 12, they went to Montreal off the bye, lost that game 37-16. So you can say a couple different things. You can say, well, yeah, their two big losses came to playoff teams in their buildings, but when we played in our building, we won. Then you can also turn around and say, your two losses came to good teams, your one win came against Ottawa. So there's a two-way street conversation to have there. What you can say is they were under 500 off their bye. Looks like the Ticats are probably going to be without Braylon Addison. He was limited in practice on Wednesday. He did not practice today, so chances are he's probably not going to be ready for this game. Seontae Evans, one of the Ticats' best defensive backs, he's been limited in practice as well, so he's kind of 50-50 heading into the game. The Ticats obviously need more from their offense if they want to win this game. Only 237 total yards last week against Montreal. They only possessed the ball for 26 and a half minutes. That needs to be better if they want to beat the Argos. But here's the big story that came out today. So a night or two ago, on behalf of the team, this was a team request, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment requested several Argos players to go to the Raptors game. One of those players was McLeod Bethel Thompson. So the fact that those Argos players, Charleston Hughes was one of them as well, went to that Argos game, that actually broke CFL COVID protocols. So originally when this story broke, what you had to do was players had to quarantine for 4 days, which means, oh, he's not going to be able to play. The update that just came down a few minutes before I started recording was that if McLeod Bethel Thompson quarantines for the next 2 days and 2 nights, which he was sent home from the team facility, he is currently doing that. He had a PCR test today, which has to come back negative. He's going to have a PCR test tomorrow that has to come back negative, and has to have a rapid antigen test on Sunday and have that come back negative. If all of those tests come back clean and he quarantines for the next 2 days and 2 nights fully, completely, then he will be able to play in this game on Sunday. If they do not come back clean, or if he doesn't quarantine for that time or whatever, if any part of that is not fulfilled, it's going to come down to Antonio Pipkin at quarterback for the Toronto Argos. An obvious clear downgrade at QB1 for the Argos. So this is kind of a tough game to cap because we probably know who the quarterback is going to be, but we're not 100% sure. What we do know is the Argos' home field advantage here is obviously massive. Is it insurmountable? I don't think so, but in games that mattered this year, it seemed pretty darn difficult to get over. And then, of course, who's the quarterback going to be? I think I was going to be making this pick one way or the other, but then certainly when this story came out, and again, MLSE is 100% at fault here. Originally, I was like, oh, McLeod Bethel Thompson's an idiot. But this was not him just deciding to go to the Raptors game. He went to the Raptors game on behalf of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. I've got to take the Ticats because I don't know who the quarterback's going to be. I think I know who the quarterback's going to be. I know who the quarterback is probably going to be, but I don't know with 100% certainty who the quarterback is going to be for one team. I got to take the team that I do know. That's the Ticats. I'm going to take Hamilton to win this game. Against the spread, Hamilton originally was a +1 against the spread here, which I was going to take them obviously to win outright as an underdog play. Now, since this news has come out, this has moved all the way to Ticats -1.5. And I understand that crossing the 0 on a number is kind of one of those Vegas things where it's like, oh boy, I don't know. But look, if it's -1.5, it's a very small price to pay on the team that I think is going to win the game. So I'm going to lay the 1.5 here on the Ticats. Defense wins championships. It's a small price to pay. Ticats defense is great. Total in the game set at 46 points. This total has not moved. I'm going to stick under on it. I was going to go under one way or the other. Two teams only combined 12 and 17 to the over this year. And I believe there was one more point I wanted to make there. Oh, only 7 and 10 to the over combined against East Division opponents. So let's stick under 46 on this one. We're going to go Hamilton 23, Toronto 17. Ticats go to the Grey Cup. And before I tell you who I think their opponent is going to be, I'm going to take this opportunity, as I always do, to shout out my great friends and sponsors at Nerd Teas, even though I do not have a cup of their tea with me today, because again, my poor kettle just decided no joy. But on nerdteas.ca, you are going to find yourself dozens and dozens of incredible loose leaf tea blends and accessories, all kinds of great Christmas shopping ideas. It's not too late, but boy, folks, it's getting real close there. Go to nerdtees.ca, use my promo code BWFinest. That is going to save you 15% at checkout. You're also going to get free shipping in Canada on any order over $100. Or if you're one of my viewers in the States, you are going to get a great conversion rate on the US dollar. There's lots of great blends. I've talked about a lot of them on this show. Blueberry, lemon ginger, strawberry power up I've talked about, kiwi-licious. There's all kinds of just great stuff there. There's dessert teas, black teas, green teas, matcha teas, all the teas you could possibly imagine. So, nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest, get your free shipping, save your 15%, find yourself something to love, or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdtees.ca. So, you know who I think is going to represent the East Division, but who is going to meet them in the Grey Cup from the West Division? The Saskatchewan Roughriders, winners last week over Calgary, hit the road, go up to Winnipeg, a rematch of the Labor Day Classic, the Banjo Bowl, like a great rivalry in the West Division. Always feels good. This is going to be a hell of a game, folks. The Riders in Winnipeg taking on the Blue Bombers. Saski now 10-5 on the season, winning, of course, last week after losing their final game of the regular season. The Blue Bombers 11-3 on the year, losers of 2 straight, but 2 straight games that, did they really matter? No, they didn't, did they? Winnipeg was utterly dominant in the head-to-head matchup between these two. Again, Labor Day and Banjo Bowl. That was in weeks 5 and 6. Winnipeg winning 23-8 in Saskatchewan in week 5. Then in week 6, they went to Winnipeg and it was not close, 33-9. So they outscored them 56-17 in the 2 games head-to-head this season. Pretty dominant showing by the Bombers. Riders are 3-1 in their last 4 games, but their one loss was a pretty significant one, and the scoring in those 4 games was it's even, in fact, 24-24 on average, despite winning 3 of those 4 games. Bombers only 2-2 in their last 4 games, but outscored opponents by an average of 10 points, 26-16. Riders were kind of middling against the West Division this year. They did play 10 West Division opponents so far this year. They're 6-4 in those games, but they're being outscored by 2 points on average, 24-22. So their losses were significant against talented West Division opponents. 2 of those 4 losses coming against the team they have to play this week. And Winnipeg, utterly dominant again against the West Division, 6-1 this year, outscoring West Division opponents 28-11. You probably know where I'm heading. Home and away, Riders were above 500 away from their own building, but were outscored on average by 5 points, 22-17 in those games. Winnipeg at home, they ran the table. They were 7-0, 28-9 was the average score in Bombers home games this year. Yeah, like they were basically from the point where they had that back-to-back with Saskatchewan in weeks 5 and 6. Basically from that point, it was very clear who the class of this league was. If the Riders do have an edge in this game, it probably comes on special teams. Winnipeg really struggled kicking the football this year. I believe their field goal percentage was only like 62%, like it was really bad. I might be able to kick for 62%, and I am very much not a professional kicker. And Saskatchewan's was pretty solid. They definitely win in the return game significantly. Their kicking was much better than Winnipeg's was this year. So if there is an edge, they may find an edge in the special teams game. The biggest edge for the Bombers, basically everything else. In almost every other measurable way, the Bombers are significantly better than Saskatchewan. That does not mean that Saskatchewan can't beat them, because look, Riders fans are very passionate. I don't want to get anybody mad at me. But in almost all measurable ways, Winnipeg is the better football team. The Bombers coming off of the bye this year, they won both of their games coming off bye weeks. They only had 2 bye weeks this year. They outscored opponents in those games by a total of 61-30, so like an average of 31-15 in the 2 games. A win in week 9 in BC, that game was 30-9. And then week 14 at home against the Alouettes, they won that game by 10 points, 31-21. So solid showing coming off the bye, didn't let it affect them. And don't look now, but he's probably back. Andrew Harris, a full participant in practice over the last couple of days. He is probably back in the lineup for the Bombers now when the games mean the most. And you look at what the Riders did last week, and I understand that the Riders' defense is not as good as the scoring numbers would tend to suggest. The Riders cannot hope to do what they did last week and win. They allowed 400 yards and they threw 4 interceptions. Cody Fajardo throwing 4 interceptions offensively, and they still won that game. They cannot possibly hope to have a defensive or offensive performance anywhere near what they actually did last week and expect to be able to win that game. Genuinely, Saskatchewan winning last week is shocking, kind of, to me, because you look at the defense did not play well. They turned the ball over a bunch. Kadeem Carey ran for like $115 and 2 touchdowns, and somehow the Riders still won that game. And look, it was very impressive. Don't get me wrong, and they deserve to be here. But it shocks me to look at some of the lines, some of the things that happened in that game. It shocks me how they managed to win. And look, that's resiliency, and you need resiliency this time of year. Them winning this week would be probably bordering on miraculous to me. So definitely on Winnipeg. I'm sorry, if I saw the path for Saskatchewan to win this game, I would be all over it. You know me, I love picking me some underdogs. But I just don't see the path for them winning the game. So we're going to have to go with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to win the West Division. So on the line, Winnipeg is favored by 8.5 points here at home, which is totally understandable. I am going to go ahead and lay those points. I think this is a 2-possession game, firmly a 2-possession game, which means that's where this would land against the spread. Winnipeg is also above 500 this year as a favorite of 7 points or more, which is what they are in this game. So I'm going to go ahead and lean on that and lay the 8.5 points for Winnipeg. Total in the game is set at, I believe it may have changed. It didn't. Total in the game is set at 45.5. I think I'm going to have to stick under on this total as well, because the Bombers defensively were just utterly dominant at home this year. So, well, just in general, but especially at home. So I think I got to stick under on this one. They were only combined 9, 19, and 1 to the over this year, and 3 and 11 situationally, that being Winnipeg at home, Saskatchewan on the road. They only hit 3 of 14 overs. So we're going to stick under on the 45.5 points. Let's go Winnipeg 26. Saskatchewan, 14. There you have it, folks. Those are my picks for the East and West Division finals in the CFL in 2021. We'll go over them here with you one more time. In the East Division, I've got the Hamilton Ticats beating the Toronto Argos by a final score of 23-17. So we're going to be laying the 1.5 on Hamilton in a game that stays under 44 points. Total was actually 44. I think I erroneously said 46 earlier in the episode. It is 44, so under 44. And in the West Division final, I got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers beating the Saskatchewan Roughriders by a final score of 26-14, which means I'm laying the 8.5 points in a game that stays under 45.5 points. Look, for the sake of Toronto Argos fans, I genuinely hope McLeod Bethel-Thompson is the quarterback. I really do. That's the game that everybody deserves to see in the East Division. What I think probably for most of the season were the best 2 teams in the East Division. That's the game that everybody deserves to see. I hope we get to see the Argos at full strength. That's it for me. I hope you enjoyed the episode this week. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled in spirit today by my great friends and sponsors at Nerd Tees. And once again, enjoy the games on Sunday. And fingers crossed we get the games that we hope to get. And that goes for Andrew Harris, too. Fingers crossed we get to see Andrew Harris, because it's a great question how many more games that man has left in what has been a very illustrious career in this league. Hopefully we get to see one more on Sunday. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the games on Sunday. We will see you again for your Grey Cup preview and predictions. So here is a look at my fantasy roster for the East and West finals. And obviously you'll see the glaring omission is not having a quarterback. As far as I'm concerned, the 4 quarterback options this week are money pits. You cannot field a solid team, in my opinion, with $30,000 if you want to include a defense, which I think it's important to include a defense, and there's one in particular, and it's the one that you're looking at right now. You can't do it if you have a quarterback. I just don't think it's feasible. And most of the quarterbacks, especially off the performances that we had last week, the quarterbacks are not worth the money that they are going to cost. So I am playing 0 QB this week, going with Don Jackson at running back, Kenny Lawler and Rasheed Bailey at wide receiver and flex respectively, and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on defense at home. Obviously, I think that's the most solid start on defense. The Riders defense, it was really obviously not impressive last week. So I think Lawler and Bailey are going to feast on them. And Don Jackson had a solid output last week. The Argos, one of the worst run defenses in the league. So I'm going to go ahead and lean on that as well. That is my roster for the East and West finals in CFL Fantasy.